But I think what is even more interesting is the fact that the most devastating violence is perpetrated by your average law-abiding citizen, by your good Christian citizens. Haven't you thought it very peculiar that when the Army recruits, it does not recruit killers? Here is the greatest killing machine in the world, right? And yet it weeds out killers. It looks at your criminal record and says, we really don't want any criminals in here. What then do they want? Nice American people, Christian boys, right? Law-abiding boys, high school graduates, people with what? Clean records. Because they are the most conducive to making into killers. Apparently they make the best killers. And if you look at the record of the U.S. Army, that would seem to be the case. But you see, people want to make you think that the average so-called gang kid in the gang out here is fundamentally different from the rest of us. Therefore, they must have some kind of unique genetic orientation. And we don't look at the reality of the situation. Those people we won't permit to be our killers. We want people who don't have records to be our killers. Why? Well, they've been trained to submit to authority only, without thinking, you see. They've shown by their clean records that they're not rebels. So if their officer says, take that hill, off they will go. It doesn't matter what the point is. They're used to what? Bowing to authority and obeying authority unthinkingly. They have been trained into conformity. They have been psyched out by something called being a man, so that despite the immorality of what they may be called on to do, when you challenge their manhood, they will then go out and do the most dastardly deeds of all, you know, so you hype them on that bit. They've been trained to respond to patriotic music, so you play the music and beat the drums and off they march to war. It doesn't matter what it is. They have been trained to believe that as Americans or whatever nationality, they are morally superior to their enemies, and that their enemies are less human than they. And therefore you can even use their very religion as the key to getting them to kill by designating the other people as pagans, non-believers, and so forth. That's why you want the moral ones, you see. They really make good killers. Because as soon as you indicate to them that they don't believe in the same God you do, you're ready to go and do them in. So these average, moral, law-abiding people also have a genetic marker for violence, and yet it has been under the banner of religion and patriotism that most of the killing and death in the world has occurred. And then they want to come to you and convince you that the kind of violence that occurs on our streets, which we must end, of course, represents our children having some kind of genetic marker for violence. And this is media. Media. And as you said earlier, Sister Dobson, this is the way the game is set up. So the whole thing is ridiculous, but people fall for it. Because again, we fall for authority. The other thing we fall for, of course, It's what I call the medicalization of social problems. The little sentence I didn't get a chance to finish on Gil's show there. We'll do anything if the doctor says so. Why are you taking that poison? Well, the doctor told me to take it every 2 hours. Doesn't matter what it is. The doctor says do it. So I do it. So what do we do then? We take psychiatrists, doctors, MDs, and when they put labels on our children, we're ready to let them do anything to these children they want to because they are the doctors. Freedoms can be taken away immediately, privileges immediately, constraints put on people immediately. All kind of torturous things can happen in the name of treatment as long as some doctor, has authorized it. So if you really want to get around constitutional issues and other kind of issues, you turn a social problem into a medical problem, and you give it a medical label, and people then will accept what is done in the name of medicine that they would not accept if it were done in the name of some kind of social label. Even the victims themselves and the people themselves will submit to the treatment once the treatment is rationalized in terms of a medical designation. It's getting too expensive to keep these young men in jail. I saw somewhere the other day. We've got to find another way of controlling them. So if we give them drugs, we could perhaps, have something next to house arrest. You just keep them drugged up and control their moods and control their behavior and keep it going for the rest of their lives or until they grow old enough such that they won't probably engage in so-called criminal behavior. But as I warned my audience the other evening, you must recognize then that there's nothing new about these kind of initiatives. These initiatives have occurred from the very beginning since our enslavement. What you must recognize is the fundamental thing, and that fundamental thing is that we are dominated, and those who dominate us will constantly look for the means of justifying their domination. And each new initiative essentially is a new thrust which provides a new logic for justifying domination and a new methodology for executing it. But the constant there is still domination. The constant there is still social control. In other words, the European never intends to give up social control of African people. And the only thing that will be changed will be perhaps the justificatory excuses and the methodologies of control, but little else. You must keep one fundamental thing in mind, as Howard Zinn warned, that the establishment, though it may reward us, in order to maintain its control, if necessary, it will kill us. The essential idea that motivates white supremacy is that of maintaining control and dominance. And this establishment that maintains control and dominance will at one time reward you, Negro bourgeoisie, and when necessary to maintain its control, will also kill you. And I'm saying that because there's some of us who think because we are receiving certain rewards from this system, that these rewards will continue forever. But you have to recognize rewards are a mean of control as much as punishment. We talk about it in psychology as what? Positive reinforcement. Yeah. Bribing. Yeah. So you give positive reinforcement, good salaries or what have you, good house and so forth, and all of a sudden those people who were gate rebels in the 1960s become neoconservatives in the 1980s and said, you know, they got the good life, they bought the idea, they think that this is going to go on forever. Have not studied the manipulation through rewards. And they went to college to study psychology. You know, and I've told you before how we are miseducated when we study psychology. We'll go right in there and study Skinnerian psychology and conditioning. And what have I told you before? We will not put ourselves in the place of the rat in the box. And we will not put ourselves in the place of the Pavlovian dog. We misidentify ourselves with the experimenter. But the actual condition of African people at this point is that of the Pavlovian dog and the Skinnerian rat, with others being at the controls and manipulating rewards and punishments and what we call negative reinforcements as a way of controlling our behavior. And when we talk about behavior in psychology, we not only talk about movement, but mental behavior as well, thinking in certain ways, seeing in certain ways, experiencing the world in certain ways. We include that too under behavior when we talk about behavior. And there are three fundamental ways, you see, of maintaining behavior in a conditioning situation. Rewards, and then what we call positive reinforcement. Then you have negative reinforcement, which isn't the same as punishment. It's a situation where you release a person from a painful situation on the condition that they behave in a particular way. So in a sense, you put them in a painful situation. You say, well, I'll let you out of this if you do this. Or if they're in a painful situation, you say, well, I'll remove this situation if you behave in this way. This is what we call negative reinforcement. You see, a release from a negative situation, which is a form of reward. So I will release you from the ghetto if you say, I am an American and I love it. There is no racism. I don't feel dominated. Individualism is the highest ideology in the world. Okay, we'll give you a little extra pennies and you can live in a nice house. Get yourself a VCR and look at movies. And then those who belong to the underclass, we just can't change them. They're in a painful situation. They look like they even like it there. So for those, we have to administer what? Punishment. You see. But what do all of these have in common? Social control. Control. You see, so those of us who are being rewarded by the American system doesn't mean that we are any more out of the control of Europeans than those of us who are in the prisons. The game is the same. Social control, and until you decide as a people to end the capacity of whites to control your lives, we will always be subservient to them. And if one day we have to recognize that it becomes necessary to annihilate African people in order that the European stays in social control, then they will annihilate us.